Hello and welcome to Gardening with Ben. This is our 11th episode. Welcome if you're a new listener to the page, or if you're a returnee, thank you for returning. Make sure you click that subscribe button to stay up to date with all our podcasts as we release these on a daily basis at 7 o'clock in the morning, so you can listen to them on the way to work or when you're at the allotment, enjoying the fresh air and the beautiful weather that we get. So yeah, thank you for tuning in. So today's episode is going to be all about gardening tools. What's my favourite gardening tools and what are the best tools to have for an allotment in a garden, what I recommend. So let's get on with today's episode and I hope you enjoy it. So when you first start gardening or decide to start the hobby of gardening, or even if you're first taking on an allotment, knowing where to start with gardening tools can be tricky. You can think, I'm just going to go out and buy all these tools and get all these for my allotment and make use of them. But some tools are better than others, some are useless, and some you don't really need to spend hardly anything on getting. So we're going to explain what my favourite tools are for the allotment and what are needed and what are not necessarily needed for an allotment and for the garden. So first we're going to talk about the basic tools which you need for an allotment ideally and for the garden. So obviously the main tools which you will need for a plot are a trowel, a hand fork, a normal fork and a spade. So they're the four main tools which you need for an allotment and garden. So for a trowel, you tend to use that if you are planting stuff in the ground, if you're planting your produce or planting your flowers or even planting your bulbs. You can use that for planting your plants. And something that I've always seen people use as well when it comes to planting potatoes is using a bulb planter. A lot of people say you need to dig trenches for potatoes, but that's not necessarily the case. You can use a bulb planter and that will go to the right depth that you need to plant your potato and use that to plant your potato, and then you heap the soil up on top of it. It saves a lot of time and effort digging out those trenches when you can just use a bulb planter. Next, you obviously need a handheld fork. Now, this is the tool which I use probably 98% of the time on the plot, as these are perfect for weeding with, for digging stuff out of the ground, and basically most of your time in the garden and allotment will be weeding. So without one of those tools, you'd be lost. And they're not expensive either. You can get more expensive ones for stainless steel, better handles. But if you're just starting out on an allotment or garden, just get a cheap one and it'll last you a year at least, or two. And if you look after it and clean it after you've used it, it will last you years. So a hand fork is the most vital tool which I can recommend that you'll need for the garden. Next is a fork. A bit like a hand fork, you've obviously got your main fork. The reason why you need a fork is for, again, digging weeds up and roots up, as you don't want to use a spade for doing this, as this will cut through the roots and it will possibly create more and more weeds. Every time you cut through a root of a weed, it will produce more weeds. So you definitely need a fork. And again, if you look after it, clean it and everything, it won't go rusty and it will last you years to come. Next up is a spade. Now, I've got a spade on my plot, but I must say I never hardly use it at all. The only time I would use a spade is if I'm digging out to build something, or if I'm digging out a trench for potatoes, if I'm making a trench for potatoes. That is the only times I would use it. or if there's a big stubborn root which I need to dig out, I'd use a spade. But a spade, I'd say, hardly ever gets used in my allotment at all, as there's no need to use one when you can just use your hand fork and your fork. It's only for digging that I tend to use a spade. It's probably, you probably don't want to spend much money on a spade, as you won't make much use of it at all. So I'd have that as low down on your priority list if you're looking at tools for your garden and allotment, unless you're going to be doing a lot of digging and building. So next up is the garden hoe. Now the garden hoe is a godsend. I've got the Wolfgarten range of tools, where you buy the handle and you can replace the head for which head you want to go on the handle. So you only have to keep buying the different heads. You don't have to keep buying the whole full tool every time. And my garden hoe gets used a lot. If I'm wanting to keep my beds clear of weeds, I will go around once or twice a week in between my fruit and vegetables and flowers and hoe my beds, as this takes minutes rather than hours of digging all the weeds out. Obviously, you don't tend to get all the roots out, but if you're doing it frequently, once or twice a week, you'll keep those roots down and they won't get hold. And it makes your beds look so much tidier just using a hoe every few days on your beds to keep them looking perfect and pristine. And I've known somebody on the allotment and they've had massive onions because they've kept their beds hoed on a regular basis and it's kept on top of the weeds, and you don't have to spend ages keeping it cleared and weeded. If you haven't heard already, the place where I'm recording these podcasts is an app called Anchor, and it's totally free. They also put your podcasts on multiple platforms like Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts. Straight away, you can also schedule the time that you want it to go on, which is fantastic. There's also creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer, so you can record your podcast literally anywhere you want. You can also make money from your podcasts as well, with no minimum listenership whatsoever. So the more times it gets played, the more times you can earn money from it. And there's everything you need to make your podcast all in one place. So if you download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm, you can get started with your free podcasts. The next tool that I recommend is a dibber. And if you don't know what a dibber is what puts the holes in the soil. Rather than having to use a stick or anything, a dibber is a perfect tool. They're not expensive to buy either. I think I bought mine for £2 from the supermarket, and it's plastic, so it'll last years. Or you can get wooden ones if you want to be environmentally friendly, and these are perfect. They're ideal for when you're planting your plants out in the soil. It just makes a nice size hole just for you to drop your plant straight into the soil, and it's perfect. I couldn't ask for a better thing to stick in the soil to make your holes to plant your plants in, as it saves getting your fingers mucky as well, sticking your fingers in, as I've done that quite a few times. But mind you, when you're gardening, you definitely have often black fingers, not green fingers. So yeah, a dibber is perfect for making those holes in the soil. The next up is obviously a watering can. Now, some people might think to get a hose pipe for the plot, which is ideal. It's perfect for filling up water butts. You're best off having water butts on the plot to catch rainwater if possible, as rainwater is a lot better for the plants than natural water from the tap, as the rainwater has more nutrients in it apparently than the tap water. So catching the rainwater for your plants will provide better plants. So if you've got water pots, use your watering hose pipe to fill them up, and have a watering can for watering your plants, as you will only be watering the plants. You won't be watering all the soil, which your hose pipe will do. It will wet all the soil around, and it will stop more weeds from growing where they shouldn't grow, as you're just watering the plant with the watering can and not the hose pipe, which will actually saturate all the ground, and you'll end up with hundreds of weeds growing where they shouldn't grow and where you don't want them to grow. So the last tool which I'm going to mention about is my favourite tool, and that's called a soil miller, and that is from the Wolfgarten range again. And the soil miller is basically a hoe on one side for slicing through the weeds, and on the other side it's got like some prongs what go through the soil, and it rips up all the roots what are in the soil, and also it chops the soil up into tiny pieces. So it's ideal if you're wanting to mix compost in with the soil, chicken pellets in with the soil, or manure. And this tool, it just slices through the soil so well. It's not brilliant on wet soil, it can clog up the tool, but on dry soil and fairly damp soil, it will just slice through it all, and it's a bit like a rotavator really. It just cuts through all the soil and gets all the roots to the surface and slices through it. It's an expensive tool, but it's probably one of my best investments for the plot, this tool, as I really enjoy it. Talking about rotavators, I see a lot of people get allotments and they'll just get on the plot and rotavate it all. Now, I did that when I first took on the plot, and I've learned from it, and I'm giving advice to anyone that takes on plots not to rotavate your plot when you first take it, because what a rotavator will do, it will chop up all the roots into thousands and millions of roots, and you will be faced with weeds for years and years and years. The best trick to starting an allotment is just hand weed it all from scratch, as you will be getting out all the roots. It'll take forever and it'll take a long time, but if you work through it over the year, you'll be able to get all the roots out and you won't get as many weeds growing every year. So the tool that I don't recommend is a rotavator. So if you're looking at starting an allotment, don't hire a rotavator to rotivate it all to make it'll look lovely once it's all rotavated and completely dug over, but you will be faced with a massive issue unless you get all them roots out. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Gardening with Ben on my favourite gardening tools and one of the best gardening tools to start an allotment and a garden off with. I hope you found it beneficial, me going through what each tool does and what you need them for. And obviously from this you don't really need many tools to be getting on with. So it gives you an idea of what tools to start with and where to begin really when you're getting an allotment and a garden. So if you're not following me on social media, feel free to find me on Facebook, Insta and YouTube, which is all Gardening with Ben. And check out my website as well, www.gardenandallotment.com. There is a link to it in the bio below. And remember to subscribe to these podcasts to stay up to date with all my new episodes. They get published on a daily basis at 7 o'clock in the morning, so you can listen whenever you want. I hope you've enjoyed. Until next time, everybody, keep gardening.